Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this session of Global Solar Council Virtual Forum. This session is about how to catalyze the process of adoption of solar PV worldwide in both the sector of the world, the developing and developed countries, and in full market, utility scale, and distributed generation. We have for that three expert speakers. Alejandro Labanda, Mr. Alejandro Labanda from Spain. He's Head of Studies of UNEF, the Solar Spanish Association, as you can see. Subrahmanyam Pulipaka from the Solar National Federation of India, the CEO, and Ms. Alessandra Brioschi. He's in charge of international affairs at ItaliaSolare, a member of the board of the Global Solar Council. Thank you for being today with us. The idea is to have a short introduction from any one of us, and then discuss the subject of the table, incorporating the question that the audience and ourselves we are searching from the presentation of each of you. Before starting with you, that's just a very short introduction. Right today we have in the energy sector a trending topic that is the policy of the 4Ds: decentralization, diversification, decarbonization, and digitalization. And the 4Ds are key aspects of the process, of course, but the process is by far more than that. We are changing the way of producing and consuming energy, changing from fossil fuels to a renewable energy matrix. We have to achieve the goals of at least the Paris Agreement and 100% of renewable energy for 2015. And to do that, we have to increase our efficiency, doing this process cheaper and faster and more efficient. To discuss about that, we start with the presentation of Alejandro. Alejandro, please.
Thank you, Marcelo, and thank you to the Global Solar Council for this invitation. Well, as Marcelo was saying, the truth is that climate change is here and now. I don't know how it's possible that there are still negationists among us with all the events we are witnessing in the last years, with only, and I put this between question marks, 1 degree rise in global temperature. We are seeing droughts in Yemen, in Western US, the heat wave in Canada, tropical temperatures near the Arctic Circle. I could go on, but I will be talking about this throughout my speech, and I want to speak a little bit about renewables as well. Fortunately, as Marcelo was saying, this importance of the risk caused by climate change is already penetrating at the political level. There are more than 110 countries that have already pledged to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And also a large number of countries that have ambitious targets for 2030. However, as we all know, the UN, the United Nations insist that this is not enough. With the measures currently announced, we are on our way to reach 3 degrees by the end of the century. And if we are seeing these weather events with just 1 degree of increase, I do not want to imagine what will happen if we reach this figure, these 3 degrees. Fortunately as well, the risk of climate change are already starting to sink in at the highest level at the energy sector. This year is the first time that the International Energy Agency publishes a report consistent of a net zero roadmap to 2050. And in it, the IEA says that we are very far from what is needed to achieve net zero. And among others says that we have to more than triple our investment in clean energy sources. Fortunately as well, we have solar. The IEA told us last year, in last year's World Energy Outlook, solar energy is the cheapest energy in history, and due to its reduced environmental impact, its modularity, the easiness to deploy, has become the new king of electricity system worldwide, and will be in that share for decades. Apart from decarbonization, solar is the agency says key to increasing access to energy. Still, 700 million people remain without energy access today. In short, to meet the emission reduction targets, we face the greatest transformation of the energy system that human beings have seen, due to the speed at which changes are going to take place. We have solar energy as a great tool, but has to be exploited up to the maximum potential. And in this, we face all legal frameworks anchored in the past, political measures that are not really suited to the scale of this transformation or the potential or the status of this technology. So it's very good to set these targets, and even if it's not always easy to commit to them, as a political measure, it's probably the easiest to take, because it determines, or it sets only the end of the road, but not how the target is to be reached. The really difficult thing is how to go from as is to be. In other words, going from a regulatory framework designed for fossil fuels and centralized generation to one based on renewables and distributed generation and self-consumption. To do this, we have to reform current regulatory frameworks and introduce specific policy measures for the promotion of renewables to allow accelerated deployment as we need to meet the emission targets. This is the real challenge, and this is where this kind of initiatives, this kind of roundtables are really useful to share experience and learn from international lessons learned. Going to the point, for ground-mounted plants, I highlight 3 areas in which there are barriers to a real big-scale deployment: permitting, network access, and in the third place, financing and the economic management, the economic viability or feasibility of the plant. In permitting, the recipe is clear: the greatest possible simplification, while at the same time maintaining the highest environmental requisites and the transparency with all the stakeholders, especially those in the communities where the solar plant will be built. For this, it's essential to establish clear procedures for the developer, based on a regulation with concrete steps and explicit deadlines for all the actors involved. The request to other actors in the process, in the permitting process, must have positive silence. So in absence of response, the permit is obtained, and must introduce the greatest possible simultaneity. It's not possible that we have procedures, administrative procedures, or authorization procedures with bottlenecks that do not allow the agents to go forward in the process. All the process should be going forward in parallel. Also, it's very important to establish, to set a communication between the different administrative levels. You know, Spain is one of the countries that in which this happens a lot, but also, for example, in India, we have several layers of administration. We have central, regional, provincial, local, and all these 4 have to communicate among them. And for this is key digitization. The digitization is also to be introduced and extended to avoid the need to physically go to the administration office and allow its employees to work remotely. Regarding network access, it's the same recipe as before. A simple and clear process is also necessary to avoid risks for the promoter, with specific response times, positive silence from the network owners. And also, regarding network access capacity, the transparency on this is essential. It's essential that when capacity is scarce and there's a strong competition, all the network access information should be available to everybody, to all the actors, not only the traditional utilities. That for this, the framework has to introduce a specific provision to avoid the existence of information asymmetry, especially when there are vertically integrated companies, both in networks ownership and in the development of renewables. Finally, regarding the financing and management of the facility, it's clear that in renewables in general and solar in particular have a different cost structure than fossil technologies and require different economic framework. the day-ahead market, as is based on a marginalist clearing, may be not the best tool to offer a long-term investment signal to developers. So a specific mechanism has to be introduced to allow the price risk and allow these developers to obtain financing. That's where auctions come in. I'm sure we are going to talk about auctions in the questions. Auctions as a great tool to lock in a long-term price for generated power. With this certainty, developers can go to a financial institution, obtain the funds for the projects, and do a project finance that banks are used to. This is of great importance for the independent power producers, as I say, and small developers that cannot issue corporate debt as the general conventional utilities can do. And an alternative to auction is that also creates an investment signal under certain conditions, as obviously are PPAs, the power purchase agreements. These are contracts between the energy producers and the consumers who want to certify the electricity as renewable. And in this, the regulator has to eliminate all the existing barriers for these kind of contracts and be a promoting actor, contracting the supply of the electricity of the public buildings with these renewable producers. And leaving ground-mounted plants, I'm going to go on to self-consumption, to distributed generation. The same barriers more or less affect this segment. In administrative procedure, it's essential to eliminate unnecessary permits. For example, in PV rooftop, eliminate construction work license. And regarding the network, it's essential that PV rooftop goes to abbreviated processes and have exemptions for the obtention of the permits. And regarding the exploitation and the economic viability of these kind of facilities, the PV rooftop, that's depend on the solar resource of each country. In Spain, for example, we have a tariff. The energy generated by self-consumption goes against the energy consumption. This is like an energy efficient measures. The electricity that is not taken from the network is valued at the end consumer price, and with these savings, the facility is repaid, is paid back. So if this is the case, the design of the electricity tariff, it's a key issue for the profitability of these facilities. And this is the case, as happens in Spain, we have to look at the fixed term of the tariff. If the fixed component is too high, the incentive to install self-consumption will be very low, as for example, in Spain for domestic consumers. And obviously, we shall avoid at all costs to introduce charge for self-consumed energy. This the sadly famous sun tax that we had in Spain, but unfortunately we have not anymore. And to conclude and leave the floor for my colleagues, solar energy is the most competitive energy source in terms of costs, in terms of environmental impact, and in terms of flexibility and modularity. So the role of the regulator at the moment is not considering very attractive grants or feed-in tariff, but establishing stable and clear frameworks and be a facilitating agent, accelerating permitting as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. And now is the time, the Subrahmanyam, please.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. And I must say, Alejandro has covered quite a few points and actually gave a very good beginning, or I would say setting the context very well. And I would not like to repeat what he said, but I will take off from where he left over. He incidentally started mentioning about the global warming, climate change, and the 1.5 degrees. We should go back and sort of acknowledge and remind ourselves that in COP21 at sidelines of the summit in Paris, where the Paris Agreement was signed, Global Solar Council was formed then, and we were the private sector response for this climate agreement, where we wanted to bring the industry associations across the globe onto a single platform and establish a regional discourse and on a global scale. We were very happy. Our chairman, Mr. Pranav Mehta, also served as the chairman of Global Solar Council in 2019. And as India Paris COP21 was also memorable for us because India co-founded International Solar Alliance along with France in December 2015 during the COP. And in the last 5-6 years, we can see how the world has transformed under the umbrella of both COP, ISA as well as Global Solar Council. Coming back to today's topic, which is on focusing what kind of barriers that are existing for proliferation of solar energy in both developed and developing countries. I would again like to come back to the Paris Agreement. Before COP21, back in COP20 and before that in COP18, the so-called developed countries who have been polluting the world since last 30-40 years and are responsible for more than 75% of global emissions in the last 3 decades, which is equal to almost 894 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide. They have pledged $100 billion for developing countries. This was back in 2012-2013. And the same thing was used in the Article 9, point number 11 of COP21 Paris Agreement, re-emphasizing that these countries will pay $100 billion to developing countries. There is 2015 agreement. Now we are in 2021. So far, not even a single penny has seen the light of the day. So when we talk about global commitments, we should also ensure, apart from countries pledging and talking, building castles in the air, we should ensure that these countries also are held accountable to it. This is on the Paris Agreement front. But I am here proud to say India is the only G20 country and only country, one of the 4 countries in the world, which is in line to achieve its Paris commitments of decreasing its emissions by 30% from 2005 level, 45% by 1990 level. You see how, as a developing country, we are showing an example to both developed and developing countries on how to honor your commitments and be accountable. Now let us keep the climate narrative aside, come to the solar issues. As National Solar Energy Federation of India CEO, I spend less than 4 hours sleeping every day because even Alejandro mentioned how Spanish system has a federal level, state level, local level. India is not a country. India is a subcontinent. We are a country of 1.2 billion people. And today we are home to the world's 5th largest solar capacity. As we speak, we have 44 gigawatt of installed solar capacity. When we started back in 2013, 2014, we were just 4 megawatt. So from 4 megawatt to 40 gigawatt in 8 years is a tremendous and a successful story that the world can learn lessons from. We did have our challenges. India, out of 44 gigawatt, if you ask me, 90% of it comes from utility scale. We have large scale, mega, giga solar parks. We have solar parks of big size, which can fit 75 football stadiums, 82 Taj Mahals, and almost 140 Sydney Opera houses. That is how big solar farms we have in our country. But at the same time, unlike our friends in Germany or in USA, we have opted to go more on the utility scale while overlooking the rooftop sector. So in our 44 gigawatt of installed capacity, only 4.5 gigawatt comes from the rooftop or distributed solar. So that is something that as a country, we are very aggressively looking forward to address. And as an industry body also, we are trying to see what kind of proactive policy measures we can enforce so that on the federal level, on the state level, on the local level, we can sort of increase the uptake of rooftop. This might come as a surprise to many of you. And I can tell you this without any doubt. India is the only country where the residential consumers pay 1/5 of the electricity tariff compared to the commercial consumers. So our residential consumers pay very $1 cent, $2 cent per unit electricity rate. And my industry and commercial consumers pay $8 cent, $10 cent per kilowatt hour rate. So that is the disparity between the consumption patterns and the tariff, which is sort of ensuring that the rooftop proliferation is not much. Now, let us look at the other success story of India, where I would also like to highlight before I go into the policy recommendations or addressing the barriers. India is also the home to world's largest solarizing agricultural program, which is again distributed solar. At the end of this decade, we will be home to 2.5 million distributed off-grid solar pumps and 1.75 million on-grid solar pumps. Cumulative capacity of both of these is 13.5 gigawatt of solar. So we are going to ensure almost 4 million farmers are going to use solar energy for their farming requirements, but at the same time contribute their worth or their might to our fight against climate change. That is what we call accountability. That is what we call how to involve people from the grassroots in this fight against climate change. We are, as a country, coming from a colonial infrastructure, we have faced a lot of problems, be it accommodating renewables into our grid, be it ensuring solar has uninterrupted, no curtailment, or ensuring that solar prices, which were very high when we started our journey. You will not believe our initial days of 2008, 2009, our solar tariffs were around 20 cents per unit. Today, it is 1.9 cents. So in 6 years or in 7 years, we have fell down 10 times. And today, India is home to the world's cheapest solar plus storage energy unit, which was auctioned back in 2020. We are also home to the world's largest solar tender of $8 billion, which will be live by the end of 2025 and will bring the capacity of almost 6 gigawatt onto our grid along with 3 gigawatt of manufacturing. This is India's success story. We had our challenges, and as a policy advocacy body, we are going to address them. We are trying to address them, and we will be addressing them very proactively. But I think from India's learning, we do have quite a bit to share with both developed countries as well as developing countries. And those experiences I can broadly classify into 3 parts. And I use my favorite word for it, that is PET, P-E-T. The P stands for policy. Policy is very, very important, or a very important barrier that should be addressed when you want to have sustainable solar proliferation in your country. The policy has 3 C's: certainty, comprehensiveness, and the third C is clarity. If you have a policy which is not certain, if there is a policy that is changing every midnight, then there is no point, there will be no business, there will be no new investments coming up. And if your policy is not comprehensive and it just talks about one particular aspect and comfortably ignores others, then of course you will end up playing rapid fire with the policy. Today you are changing something, tomorrow you are changing something, and the comprehensiveness will lack and it will affect your energy story. Last but not the least is clarity. People say policy is very easy to conceive but very difficult to deliver. If you have a clear policy, you can easily conceive it, at the same time equally deliver it. So policy is a very key barrier, and my friends from both Spain and Italy will very, very much understand. I closely observe the markets, and that particular fee part that Alejandro was mentioning, which was a very big issue a couple of years back, and we at India, we were also trying to see if Spain, which is now a mature market, after a period of time are experiencing these kind of problems, how as a country in India, which is going to become a mature market soon, we should be ready to adopt this kind of policy changes or policy interventions. So these 3 C's in policy are the key barriers that should be addressed when you are talking about solar proliferation, and especially the distributed solar proliferation. Utility scale is very simple. You have a tender, you have an auction, someone bids $1 cent, $2 cent, he'll get the project, he'll get all his people and install it. But for distributed solar like rooftop, if you don't have good policy, you will end up doing nothing. The second interesting part is the economics, the E in the PET. There is nothing in the world that can work without economy. Doesn't matter whether you're going to buy your toothbrush or you're going to buy a new home. Everywhere you will be looking for the cost. And solar is nothing exception. Especially solar, the way we see the prices diving, people want more affordable solar at a cheaper rates. So if you don't address this economic aspect, which is a barrier of entry to a market, then your market will not sustain. I'll give you an example of India. I told you we had $20 cents of tariff per unit back in 2008, 2009. Today, 12 years later, we are $1.9. This decrease didn't happen overnight. And this decrease didn't happen because new technology has come up. This decrease only came up because of three factors. Number one, the scale at which India is growing. I forgot to mention in the beginning, India has an ambitious target of installing 100 gigawatt by 2022 and 300 gigawatt by 2030, only solar. If it is renewable, it is 175 gigawatt by 2022 and 450 gigawatt by 2030. We have huge scale, and we are a country of 1.3 billion people. 1/7 of the world is in India. Of course, we have demand. So the scale and demand coupled with the global scenario gave us the price and the economics of scale. That economics of scale is very important for any market to succeed when it comes to solar journey. The last point, I'll not take much time, is the technology. The technology is the mother of everything. And technology, I have 2 or 3 eyes for it. Technology should be number one, indigenized. What works in India doesn't work in Europe. What works in Europe doesn't work in South America. What works in South America doesn't work in Australia. In India, we don't touch glass-to-glass modules. We don't care about CIGS modules. We only talk about polysilicon, multi-silicon. There are people who went bankrupt by starting CDTE, CIGS modules business in India, because Indian market doesn't have appetite for it. It might be different in Germany, in Spain, in Italy. So you should be indigenous. And other 2 points are my favorite words, which is innovation and integration. In our 21st century, innovation and integration, you have to have enough material or enough resources to have local innovation that can cater to your market. If you try to download things from other countries, you will end up having so over dependence, and your solar success story will not even take off. India is a classic example. In the first 2 years of our journey, we have downloaded our technology from Germany and US, and we understood it will not work here. We need local technology. We need local people. We need local skill. We need local entrepreneurs. Today, there are 5 Indian companies whose market valuation is more than $1 billion. So this is how I think the 3 aspects of PET are very important for addressing the barriers. And I will conclude here, and after that we can take questions. Thank you very much, Marcelo.
Thank you, Subrahmanyam, for your passion and enthusiasm. We'll be back with you and Alejandro in a few minutes, but now it's time of Alessandra. Alessandra, please.
Can you hear me? Thanks, Marcelo. Thanks, Alejandro and Subu. Let me just introduce a small disagreement on a general basis and statement that we have just discussed. For sure, the situation that we have on climate change is just dramatic. The point on which I am not totally aligned with my 2 colleagues is that the country, the nation, has already done a lot in terms of measures, in terms of legislation, maybe too much. Maybe the problem is that they really did too much. When we compare the national legislation, we can see that there is a very detailed and specific legislation to authorize quickly the ready-to-build status of the project. But at the end, it doesn't work. So why doesn't work? Why in the regulation it is written in most of the European, because I'm not really an expert out of Europe, but in most of the European country, the legislation states that between 4 and 12 months maximum, the big scale PV plant should be authorized in fully permitted status. And I think that if you question every company that works in this sector, nobody has never obtained a fully permitted status, including interconnection, in less than 18 months or more than this, even for lands that were absolutely easy to be used. So the point is that there are a lot of policies, there is a lot of legislation, but they don't work. So what we can do to make this legislation works? What is missing? Maybe the problem is, at least for what we experience in Europe, the problem, in my opinion, it's at the regional level, but also at regional level, there is a lot of legislation. So where is the problem? Maybe the problem is really in the management of the request. Is the management, maybe the problem is administration level, in terms of engagement, in terms of motivation, in terms of powerful of the people that has to manage the authorization. And when I'm talking about authorization, I'm talking about authorization to build, but also authorization to connect, because the two main driver of the realization of a PV plant, as everybody knows, is the authorization to build, and then we need to connect the PV plant. And in both sides, we don't have enough transparency on how the requests are managed. Why? Maybe the people local level that has to work on this file, on this request, are not motivated. So why they're not motivated? Maybe they do not understand the importance of the activity they are doing. Maybe there are other reasons behind. I think that is something that is really missing at this level. The climate change cannot be managed anymore at national or world or big level. It's something that now has to be managed more at individual and private, and starting from the work of everybody in its own sphere, in its own perimeter. And so we should try really to understand this point. So legislation is there, but it's not applied as it should be. Why? Because there is no desensibilization that it should be on the problem of the climate change.
Okay, Alessandra, thank you for this. If I were a TV presentator, I'd be the how to discuss about that, the disappointing in the point of view of every of you. But I must say that it's true that we are bigger than used to be by far, and we are growing a lot than used to be. But it's not enough. I agree with you that it's not enough. And in some countries, the framework is there, but it's not working. And in other countries, it's working, but not as well that we need. And in other countries, it's working properly. The idea of the table today is how we can identify for every niche of market how to share lessons learned of every country in order to improve others. For example, Spain used to have at the very beginning of this century a very exciting local market in terms of distributed generation and solar plants. But after the local changes, they will suffer a huge stop. And then 10 years after, they are suffering the second big revival. Alejandro, you can share with us, in your opinion, what happened then and what happened now, and what of the topics that they are key in this change is replicable in other markets?
Yeah, sure, Marcelo. Well, Spain suffered, some other countries did as well, pay a little bit a price on being one of the pioneers. And it's true that we, sometimes it's not, the winner is not the one who arrives first, but the one who is able to stay for longer. And I think that was the biggest mistake we did in the past, in terms of conceiving. Maybe we were creating markets, but we were not thinking on creating a stable economic and industrial activity to stay for longer. I mean, we were able to deploy bigger figures on solar capacity, but this was really concentrated in 1 year, or 1-2 years. And after that, we suffered a lot for some years too. After that, and the main lesson to be learned is that one is better to be slower, but to be firmer, that to be more stable, than to introduce a really attractive framework and then review it retroactively. And this created a lot of regulatory uncertainty in the country that now hopefully is disappearing. But for the main lesson to be learned is that all frameworks should be stable, not to introduce retroactivity reviews of regimes, and having in mind that we should create industry, create economic activity, not only deploy capacity figures for our renewables. These renewables have a strong potential of creating a strong industry and a strong manufacturing sector that fortunately we've been able to maintain in Spain. We have some of the biggest manufacturers of trackers, of inverters and structures, of course. And we have one of the best EPCs contractors in worldwide as well. But all these had to go abroad to try to look for the projects abroad, look for the projects internationally. But instead, what would have happened if they would have the national demand being stable for the next years? And this is what we say to the government here in Spain is, please give certitude in terms of regulatory stability, in terms of predictability for the deployment of capacity of the next years, and no retroactivity, of course.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Marcelo,
yes, please.
Can I just add one thing on what Alejandro was just saying? Spain is one of the example of what I was saying before. It means one of the biggest, and Alejandro can confirm, one of the biggest problem in Spain has been the interconnection, and there was a big speculation, as it has been also speculation in other countries. But the lack of planification of the interconnection works, especially at regional level, at a local level, brings to the burnout of the systems that brought to the moratoire that just now ended, if I'm right. So to have a transparent systems of information, especially in terms of evolution of the infrastructure for what it concerns the interconnection at national, at the local levels, it's really a key for the development of the PV plant at a big scale and also at a distributed generation scale.
Thank you, Alessandra. What do you think that is the way for developing countries? It's easier to imagine that kind of initiative in Europe, but what do you think about the developing countries?
In terms of, it's to me, right? In terms of, there is some country that are more transparency on the interconnection information access. For example, Germany, France, for sure. I think Italy is one of the last one. So it is possible to do really better than the governments are doing, and what is fundamental is that the relationship between the TSO and the rest of the market has to be clean 100%. Even in those countries where the TSO has been separated by the big ancient monopoly of the state company, this is maybe was not enough to guarantee the same access to the information and the same access to the interconnection for all the private company. So there is something that we can do in terms, of course, of interconnection. And then there is something that must be done in terms of involving of the local administration in the speed up of the authorization process. In this moment, the administration has no penalty if the process is not respected. There are no incentive also on the other side. We don't want to put only penalty, but there is no reason why an administration or an administrator has to work a lot or not on one particular request. There is no local planification because the administration and the region, first, they changed the government too much offer, especially in Italy, what we experience. And second, there is no a link between the interconnection at local level and the development and at local level of the available space. So it's like if everybody is looking on its own small interest and not at a global level. So we should introduce more coordination, but with specific focus, then has to be applied at the regional level.
Yes, it's hard everywhere, but if you can imagine that it's hard in Europe, in developing countries is even more. We are trying to develop in developing countries local job creation in order to attract the politicians to pay attention to renewables, not only for the environmental aspects, but also for the economical aspects in order to have local industry. And in this regard, Subrahmanyam, what do you think regarding the model of India? I know that it's a huge country and a subcontinent, as you mentioned, but do you think a part of the model of India is replicable in other developing countries? Why yes, why not?
No, thank you, Marcelo. That's a very, very interesting question as well as an important one. But more than that, it is the need of the hour. If you look at when ISA was formed in COP21, the objective was to make solar energy popular in the world. But the ulterior motive was to use India's experiences, India's learnings, and what we did right and what we did wrong to sort of propagate solar in the developing countries. If we look at, like I mentioned, in India, if you come and see India, in India, you can find some states which have the same population or equal resources as an African country or as a Latin American country or as a Central Asian country. So we are a land of the lands. So there are definitely things that can be taken from the Indian context and can be implemented in these developing countries. And I can go one step ahead and say developed countries also. We have done some things that developed countries can also take a cue from. But in developing countries, definitely the learnings can be implemented. For example, I will give you a clear-cut example from our personal experience. In the presence of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Vietnamese Prime Minister back in 2020, our federation and the Vietnamese Association signed an MOU, and we wanted to share our learnings in the utility scale market on how to connect tenders, get the demand, aggregate the demand, and sort of go out for auctions. That experience we are sharing with our Vietnamese counterpart. Apart from that, when you look at African countries, Vietnam is still not in top 10. So you can consider it a developing country. But last year they have installed more than India when it comes to total capacity. So we are not taking them live. But when we look at African countries, like for example, Kenya, Rwanda, or even if we go to the western part of Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, these countries have a lot of similarities in their electrical grid network and India. Of course, we are all colonial countries. East Africa is mostly British colonized and the West Africa is Francophone and French colonized. But there are a lot of similarities. And those similarities are our strengths, where we can sort of immediately copy paste our architectural infrastructural implementation mechanism into these countries. But I am giving one rider here. It is not always simply taking here and implementing there. There are some things from these countries that we need to consider while we are showing our experiences and our success stories. For example, solar pumps. India has aggregated 245,000 solar pump demand from 18 African countries. This demand has been aggregated. And we have now asked, we have come up with a global tender with ISA, inviting companies who can implement these 231,000 solar pumps. So we as a country, like I told you, we have almost 2 million solar pumps. And by the end of this decade, we'll have 5 million more. So that is an experience we are sharing with the developing countries. Utility scale, of course, India is ready to share. It is very relevant. However, I would not advise people to use India's example for rooftop or distributed. There we can talk to our Italian counterparts or German counterparts, use their expertise and even Spanish expertise in the rooftop thing. But on otherwise, there are definitely areas where India's expertise can be used in developing countries.
Yes, these are very different realities. We have to remember that we have worldwide more than 700 million people without electricity services. They must be the first in line, and in the reality are the last one in line. Used to be the off-grid application with solar was very expensive and only off-grid applications, but now are less than 101% of the total world market. And it's a shame for us that we have the technological solution, we have the programs, and we don't have the efficient way of achieving the goals, the poverty alleviation and the rural development by means of the renewable energy. We have just 4 minutes to go. A lot of things to develop in the table, but let's try to close your idea 1 minute each in order to achieve the goal of passing the next panel on time. Alessandro?
Thank you, Marcelo. Well, answering Alessandra as well, it's true that we should implement clear and specific regulation, eliminate all the existing barriers and bottlenecks, but it's true we should introduce as well this mechanism for the administration to be agile, tools and resources in terms of equipment and in terms of incentives, so they understand and they see the importance of everything that is in place. And well, thank you all, and I hope to see you through the event.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. I think if you ask me to summarize in one sentence, I would say in order to have sustainable solar proliferation in developing countries or developed countries, we have to think globally but act locally. But if there is any problem or issue you are facing, then we can panic internally. But you should think globally and then act locally. That is how the proliferation happens. We are an interconnected world. We are closer to each other than we were before. And the global perspective implemented on local side is a very, very critical element, and which I think will go a long way into addressing developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandra.
Yes, it's the same things of Alessandro and Subu. Our main responsibility now is to educate the local administration to finally do what is in their responsibility to do. The laws are there, the government are too far to understand what we need to develop and to put in place our project. So it's a local level that we have to work to educate the others. So a lot of things to do, a lot of job. The road is long, but it's in our hands. We can do it.
Thank you, Alessandra. I can be more agree with you. The reason of being of the Global Solar Council and other national and international entities is to do that. We have to improve our efficiency, our speed to achieve the goals, because we are comfortable in our places, but a lot of people are suffering a lot without the solution that are available for many years, and we are very inefficient to achieve the goals. But the creation of these spaces to discuss and to work all together could be part of the solution, just one small part. We have to act locally, as Subrahmanyam mentioned, and think globally, and consider the different realities of developed countries and developing countries, because we can learn from everyone, but we have to act locally with the reference standard that we have in every economy and every country. Thank you, every one of you. We are on time. I invite in all the people to take part of the next table. And thank you for coming today and for your words. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
We can give the floor to the second panel. I invite Mr. Cano from Bloomberg Finance to, anyway, moderate, and all of you can switch on the camera, and yes, also the second panel can start. Paul, the floor is yours for the second panel. There is not a break between the two panels. It's from the same session. So the floor is yours. You can make your introduction, then we can show the speakers of the panel. Yes, and you can move on. Paul? Paul, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. I guess I'll repeat that, but basically, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. It's going to be an exceptional discussion, and I'm really excited to be hosting and moderating the panel. Welcome from an empty conference room here in New York. My name is Paul Lezcano. I'm a solar analyst with Bloomberg NEF, based here in the US. And it's really my pleasure to be hosting this. I'll start with a very brief introduction and slides. Can you all see this? Hopefully this is working. Basically,
one moment, Shun, you can take out the speaker slide.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that working now?
Yes, you can put it full screen.
Wonderful. So
now it's perfect.
Basically, to give a little context before we start the discussion, this is BNEF, this is our coverage, this is what we do. We cover basically everything you can imagine within the energy transition. My role specifically sits, of course, within the solar team, which is the reason why I'm here. But just to give a little bit of context of the breadth and scope of what we cover. But to tie up a little bit with our discussion, I'd like to just give a little bit of points of reference to where we're coming from, what situation we are right now in 2021 as we have this conversation. As we can see, we've predicted this year to be a record year in terms of solar deployments across the world. And to put it pretty simply and boldly, the trend of growth will continue, and we expect this to be a reality in at least in the short term and in the coming years. What challenges are we having right now? Obviously, this is a very hot topic. Commodity prices going up, polysilicon prices spiking this year, and basically all the turmoil that has caused further down the stream for the solar industry. But then lastly, a little bit of the better news is that solar and wind are the cheapest source of new bulk generation across most of the world, definitely most of the developed world. This is a study that we conducted we update every 6 months. The last version came out a few weeks ago. And as we can see, solar and wind are really the cheapest source of bulk generation across most of the world, and representing more than 2/3 of the world population and 91% of the electricity generation. So bottom line is, we are here to stay, growth is going to continue, and we've achieved a level of competitiveness that many would have not expected a few decades ago. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screens and introduce our wonderful panel. So today, we're very pleased to have Alessandro Boschi, the head of Renewable Energy Division at the European Investment Bank. Welcome, Alessandro. We will also have Michelle Halleck, Energy Specialist at the Energy Division, Infrastructure and Energy Sector at the Inter-American Development Bank. Jigar Bhatt, Senior Project Officer, Energy at the Asian Development Bank. And Anthony Karembu, Principal Renewable Energy Specialist at the African Development Bank. Welcome all. I'll go straight into the first question. I'll start with Michelle. How do you perceive the specific role that your financial institution has in accelerating deployment of renewable energy? What specific obstacles are you able, as the Inter-American Development Bank, are you uniquely positioned to overcome? Compare with traditional banks and lenders, how do you see your specific role in accelerating these renewable energy project deployments? Did we lose Michelle?
Actually, Michelle is not yet here.
Okay.
So you can address the question to the other speakers.
Jigar, do you want to take it on?
Yeah. Hi. So am I audible? Hope it's clear. Hello.
Yes, very clear. We can listen.
We can hear you.
Yeah, thanks, Kon. And yeah, thanks, Paul. And good afternoon, good evening to all fellow panelists and all participants connected to this virtual event. See, being a development bank at ADB, so to development of renewable energy project is nurtured as one of the topmost mainstream activity at ADB. Also, as a part of ADB Strategy 2030 and Sustainable Development Goal 7 specifically, our commitments towards those, ADB is ensuring to explore all possibilities to support development of RE projects. Now, just let me give you some numbers, and then based on that, maybe I will try to clarify more on the role and responsibilities as a development bank we are assuming. So considering the last 3 years lending operation overall across the bank, the average annual lending of around 24 billion, which we are that's kind of business which we are doing, including this includes around 2 billion from our private sector operation, non-sovereign operation, and out of this, the share of energy sector as a whole, not only I'm saying renewable energy as a whole, it's about 3.4 billion per annum, including 640 million through private sector operation. Out of this, the specific share of renewable energy project is 600 million per annum. That's the scale which we are operating at this moment. And this includes 360 million through our private sector operating division, through our non-sovereign window. So you can see the share out of 600 million renewable energy, almost 360 million is coming from private sector operating division. And I think more than half of it comprises solar and wind, as obviously because the solar and wind are the front runner across the globe. And so around 42% from solar and 11% from the wind. That's the kind of composition. Also, we have got some significant share of around 30%, which belongs to geothermal projects, and remaining 17% are from like mainly from the biomass and small hydro. Right. So what does it represent is that the numbers are actually supports the fact that with the energy transition from conventional energy to renewable energy, there is a role changeover happening from government sector or sovereign operation to private sector as or non-sovereign operation, we can say, which we all know, right? Because most of the renewable energy development is happening through a private sector operation, and the numbers which I just shared right now are actually supportive of that phenomena. So the involvement of private sector helps a rapid expansion of the sector, increase scale of the deployment, and also the speed of deployment, which is important. And as a result, it has actually bring down the cost substantially, specifically in solar we have seen and witness. And all this is happening in a more transparent manner in the sector. So this is a kind of, advantage which private sector investment is, I think it's bringing into the renewable energy sector. And so the role of a development bank like us, who are heavily involved and our operations are heavily involved under the sovereign operation, is more to support our development member countries in framing and implementation of conducive policies and establish conducive market to catalyze the private sector investment in the projects, and also creating a roadmap to ensure such transition occurs smoothly. So that's what I perceive the role which ADB is actually taking. So that's what my response to your question, Paul.
Thank you. That's very insightful. Anthony, you want to weigh in?
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. So one unique thing about the African Development Bank is that it has a holistic approach to projects, right? And being, I'll say, the Bank of Africa looks more at solutions in accelerating renewable energy, because as you know, Africa is still dogged with a lot of fossil fuel generation. And I'll say the hydros that were constructed in the 50s, of course, with climate change, they're not regarded as reliant baseload. So I think from an AFDB perspective, the ability to have frank discussions with the government is where our role comes in terms of benefits of policy reforms and reduction of dependency of on fossil fuels. So I'll just take you back. Like in delivering the Paris Agreement in global change, global challenge as a failure to respond to imperial efforts of sustainable development, we see Africa as, in the context, is different. Africa has minor contribution to the global GHG gas emissions. And in terms of energy-related carbon CO2 emissions in Africa, Africa only represents 2% of the cumulative emissions, right? Now, with AFDB in the role, AFDB has made a deliberate effort to move Africa's development along a low carbon pathway. AFDB is also strongly committed to advocating countries to seize and develop the enormous renewable energy potential in the continent. And with this, the AFDB has certain policies. Of course, the energy policy, which was approved in 2012, and now it's been revised. And also the strategy for New Deal of Energy for Africa, which now ends in 2025, where it highlights Africa's renewable energy potential and the bank's intention to support African countries in seizing this opportunity. We have to be cognizant. The falling costs of renewable energy technologies, especially wind and solar, have made renewables more competitive, right? And the transformative power of renewable energy is evident in variety of countries. A good example, I can pick a good example, Cape Verde, with the 25 megawatt wind project, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, South Africa. We're seeing now a development of intentional development of the renewable energy projects in the integrated resource planning of these countries. One last thing I'd like to just mention is that you will remember in the 2019 UNGA Climate Action Summit, the bank formally took the position that coal is the past and renewable energy is the future. So the bank is working closely with African countries to realize their renewable energy potential. And just to add on to that, in 2019, all the bank operations, 30 operations were all renewable energy to a tune of 1.7 billion, and additionally mobilized 257 million directly from climate finance facilities. So it's very evident that the bank has a bullish approach to have renewable energy in the context of provision of power. And also, because I just mentioned now, we have a holistic approach where we still have the sovereign operations and non-sovereign operations within the energy complex. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. That was great. Alessandro, you wanna wrap up the question with some final comments?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Giuliana. And Anthony, nice to meet you. Well, I'll try to be quick so that there's time for more. But I mean, as the EU bank, we are more and more committed towards climate. So we have taken two important decisions over the last years I want to mention. So at the end of 2019, we reviewed our energy lending policy, and we had decided to focus to phase out any support to fossil fuel. So we're not supporting any fossil fuel project. So we're 100% focusing on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy networks, and also innovation in energy. So this is one thing. Then at the end of last year, the whole bank has decided to, by 2025, at least 50% of our lending will be to climate action or adaptation. Historically, it's been around 30-35%. Okay, so we're moving to 50%. But not only that, so 100% of our lending will be, we call it like this, Paris aligned. So we're not going to do any lending which is, let's say, detrimental to the Paris Agreement, if you like. Of course, we're doing also, hospitals, schools. They don't directly, contribute to climate, but they're aligned to Paris. So that's a big thing. So on renewable energy, we are doing around 4 billion euro of lending every year, and 1 billion to solar. And we're doing around 80% in the European Union and 20% outside the European Union, which is still an important amount in absolute terms out of 4 billion euro in renewable energy. I'll probably leave it at that, Paul, so that there's time to tell you more in the next interventions.
Wonderful, thank you, Alessandro. And I just received a message that Michelle just joined, so welcome, Michelle. Let's move on to the second question, and I'll start with Anthony. What have you've both talked about how the role of your institutions is in establishing a appropriate policy framework for private market participants to invest in your countries. What are project developers most worried about when they look at your countries now? What are the things that what are the types of concerns that they bring to the table most of the times? And what recommendations or specific advices do you have for project developers in the audience who wanna invest their capital, or other financial institutions who want to invest capital and time in your countries?
All right, thanks a lot. So I think one thing we have to be cognizant is that I guess the barriers in Africa are quite unique in terms of one, awareness of solar and wind, because of course it competes with food security per se. Now, what we see is that for us, the existing networks in the region were not really designed to integrate renewable energy generation. So the electricity grids will need upgrades in their infrastructure and in order to de-risk the IPPs and distributed generation. So we're seeing a lot of AFDB working with the power pools. That's the South African power pool, West African power pool, and East African power pool. For now, the Central African power pool, where DRC is still a challenge because in terms of coordination. Now, one other thing we see is that the creditworthiness of the off-takers in Africa, because at the moment right now, we still have a number of them which are vertically integrated, and therefore hidden costs and inefficiencies dog them. So I think from an off-taker's perspective, they require to be accompanied by credit enhancement instrument. And as I mentioned before, the bank looks at it holistically. If you have a developer coming, then the bank will be able to push also the government, if it is prioritizing the IPP, the solar IPP, to tap into the partial risk guarantee. And they set themselves on a path of recovery and develop dependable track record of dealing with IPPs. Now, one thing that we have seen is also the fact that the regulatory frameworks, they still have constraints and they vary. Lack of clear institutional roles between different agencies, where you have even two regulating agencies in a particular area, and also weak planning capacity, right? And also the absence of clear framework for IPPs. So this actually mismatches between, there's a mismatch also between the tariffs, because tariff is also a very, I'll say, a challenge and obstacle. But more importantly, private sector participation has been so far very limited in some areas where we have trucks and abundance of renewable energy, because you have lack of incentivized legal frameworks. And also one of the biggest issues we have seen is the fiscal and customs barriers that push these IPPs out of the market. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Michelle, do you wanna jump in?
I'd say that for Latin American Caribbean, the potential is huge, but the region is already really renewable somehow. If you compare with all the other regions in the world, it's one of the most renewable electricity metrics. So the challenge here, it's of course to keep pushing it, but especially to increase the renewability of other areas of the energy sector. When you talk specifically about investment in renewables, there are some elements that you need to consider. One of the things that I guess it's an interesting lesson learned from Latin America and the Caribbean, it is the importance and how the auctions with power purchase agreement can push the investment in new technology. So the example of Brazil, the example of Chile, the Colombia auctions, all this was successful mechanism to use private investment and to allow this kind of investment. So that's something that we learned, and we are trying to see how it can be implemented in other countries where the share of renewables is still limited. When you think about IDB commitment, as one of other panelists, Alessandra just said, the banks committed also to align their operations with the Paris Agreement. Of course, everything has their limits, but we have the objective to align as much as possible every operation of the bank with the Paris Agreement. So I guess this is a little bit a general context, and I'm happy to keep talking about that.
Thank you. No, and actually, great that you brought the auctions, because there's a great segue into our next question. I'll start with Alessandra, and then we'll go with Jigger. We've seen this ongoing discussion about the debate between subsidizing renewable energy directly, either via auctions, as Michelle just pointed out, feed-in tariffs, you name it, or what others call leveling the playing field and adapting more to a market, a pure market perspective where fossil fuels are not, basically don't receive any subsidy, and carbon pricing is implemented to essentially price the externality of emissions. So we've had this ongoing debate between what's more effective in order to spur the growth of renewable development, in this case, solar. And I'd like to hear from Alessandro first, because Europe proved a pretty interesting example, because famously the German feed-in tariffs back in the day helped catalyze the solar industry. And we've seen auctions in Spain, Italy, France, and other places also contributing to the growth of renewable energy, given the prospect of this contracted revenues with states, and how that makes projects more bankable. So I'd like to hear from Alessandro what specific projects he's been involved with at the European Investment Bank, as well as what's your take as in 2021, what do we need? Do we still need more auctions and feed-in tariffs and direct subsidies for renewable energies, or is the most effective way to just price carbon and level the playing field for each technology?
Yes, thank you, Paul, for the question. Yes, I refer to let's say the experience in the European Union, where, as you said, let's say feed-in tariffs were instrumental over the last, let's say, 10 years to develop the capacity of renewables in most countries and actually get Europe to meet its 2020 objectives. We are, so that a lot of things have changed since then. So the main thing is that, you know, as we heard earlier from BNEF, from you, Paul, in fact, that the technology have become increasingly competitive. They're actually the most competitive. In each country in Europe, there is one renewable energy source that is the most competitive. I mean, in Southern Europe, it would be solar. In Northern Europe, it can be wind, and offshore wind is becoming as well competitive. So does this mean now we can get projects without any kind of subsidy? Well, we have seen cases where this is happening, and for example, I can cite a number of examples in Spain where we have financed projects which don't have any kind of public support at all, and they have actually signed PPAs with private power purchase agreements with private counterparts, and we finance on that basis. And there have been a few cases of project finance, you know, even without PPAs, which we haven't done, because I think as a bank it is important that you know, a part of the revenues are secured for the project. I think going forward, despite the reduction in costs, and despite at the moment we are seeing also, you know, a jump in prices, if you like, due to you know, high commodity prices and high prices for the carbon, for the CO2 in EU, as we have a carbon system in the EU. So in the short term, we may see quite a few projects with PPAs, but I think in the longer run, with the penetration of renewables increasing, you will see a depressing effect, very significant depressing effect on the prices which are actually captured especially by solar in countries. When you reach a certain capacity in a country, you will actually see only solar producing at some hours of the day. And as we know, solar, so prices are based on marginal costs, and renewables and solar, they have pretty much a zero marginal cost. So there will be hours of the day where the prices are really low, and there'll be hours where gas is, for example, setting the price. But on average, the capture price would be extremely low. So in the longer run, given the extremely ambitious objectives of the EU, which is to reach 55% decarbonization by 2030, which means more than 65% of electricity generated from renewables. It means that, in my view, there will be still the need of kind of public support. It's not feed-in tariffs. You need competitive systems, auctions, and you need a I think the most typical scheme that we're seeing in Europe is called contract for differences, where let's say that the state is guaranteeing a price. However, the producer is selling on the market, and if the prices in the market are higher than that strike price, actually the promoter is giving that back to the state. On the contrary, if prices go below the strike price, this is topped up by the state. So it's a kind of guarantee, but it's a win-win situations, because the LCOEs of solar are going so down that they're going to be lower than the current level of market prices, but you still get the guarantee from a public authority to ensure a minimal level of revenues to make the project bankable. So this is where I see the big chunk of the project will be going in the EU, with some also fully on the private market through PPAs, but it will be a portion.
Great, very interesting. Yeah, no, price cannibalization in the middle of the day has been a thing in California. We're seeing it in Spain, Australia. So really interesting to hear what you have to say here. Jigar, do you want to weigh in on the debate between when you do your framework analysis and you make policy recommendations, do you think the countries you operate in are ready for some sort of carbon pricing scheme, or do you advocate for more direct subsidies like auctions or feed-in tariffs or contract for differences, as Alessandra just pointed out?
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for this question. And let me just vouch in what Alessandra has said already. But I just wanted to bring some slightly different perspective. I mean, I just wanted to break down these answer into two part. First is specifically because the entire sector is actually divided in particularly in India, specifically in this region, specifically maybe I would say rather expanded to the South Asia. It's divided into two parts, like I would say two subsector. One is the solar parks and the wind farms, like it's a bigger scale project. So the scale matters, no? So, and that's one area where we can understand what role carbon pricing or a subsidy can play, and how that can be debated. And on the other hand, we have projects or subsector like distributed solar, predominantly through solar rooftop market, and that is huge potential. So let me just give you some insights with respect to the potential available in the region where I'm operating in India. So of course, the first thing is definitely India is still to evolve the carbon pricing market. It is not yet fully developed, though there are several private MNCs who are actually trying to build such market. But I think there is a little bit thrust support which is required, which is lacking at this moment from the government. And without a government push, it cannot fully evolve and become a mature market. So therefore, if you see the government focus is specifically, at this moment, is to mostly incentivize the sector through direct and indirect subsidy, and because there is an absence of carbon market, as I mentioned. If you see the numbers, the India has actually announced very ambitious number of 175 gigawatt at the time when it was announced way back. This target we're supposed to achieve by 2022, out of which 100 gigawatt is from solar and 60 gigawatt is coming from wind energy. Though the target is subsequently revised further to 450 gigawatt, aligning with the strategy 2030. So the announcement from the government is to achieve 450 gigawatt by 2030. So such an ambitious target. And if we see the status at this moment, I think the 175 gigawatt, the initial target by 2022 is look like on track. Though there is a little bit of disruption due to impact of COVID. But see, in order to provide the benefit as I mentioned, the direct and indirect benefit, specifically to the sector which is predominantly contributing into deployment of renewable energy through solar park. It is like providing, a lot of tax rebate to the renewable energy project investment which is happening. And to attract most of the investment, they are providing a lot of direct and indirect tax benefit, whether it's investment or income from the renewable energy projects. Also, the policy is applicable for interstate and intrastate transmission of renewable energy. The tariff is actually, there is a waiver is given. And there are so on and so forth. There are benefits which are given for the development of the solar park, large scale kind of projects in India, and to attract the investment. And most of these investments is happening through a transparent bidding process at a very large scale. This is happening through a central ministry in India, which is mostly the focal agency is SECI, Solar Energy Corporation of India. And the states, because in India we have a structure where the state level are also given some kind of allocation to achieve the renewable purchase obligations, to meet the renewable energy target. So the states are also actually announcing biddings by their own, and these are of very large scale solar parks which are getting developed of gigawatt scales. So I think the kind of benefits which are provided there had actually attracted a lot of investors and a lot of developers. And this is happening because the the transparencies had been brought, and also a security on the in terms of off taker is given, because the mostly such in such bidding, either the power is being procured through a central agency like SECI or through a state distribution company. These are all government entity. So there is enough confidence which has been given to the developer to come and invest and to take part into it. On the other side, if we see the distributed solar project, the scenario is slightly different, and so has to be, because there is a difference in the policy in terms of in terms of consumer base. There is a different tariff applicable to the C&I consumer, and mostly it is on the higher side, and on the residential side, the kind of tariff are actually mostly cross subsidized. And this is of course because of a political reason also. And these are all telescopic kind of tariffs, where the low consumption of a unit will be charged at a low tariff, while higher consumption of unit will be charged at a higher rate. So in order to make viability of solar rooftop projects in the residential sector, where it is already cross subsidized, there is another additional subsidy which is being pumped in by the government to make the projects, solar rooftop projects, financially viable. So I would say it's already a cross subsidized sector where you are providing another subsidy to make the project financially viable. It's a long run. I mean, on a long run basis, it's very difficult to sustain, and that's already recognized by the government. And that's why there has to be a sunset clause into the policy, which we have already advocating at the ministry level as a development bank. And actually it's happening slowly. There has to be a sunset clause to this, because the market is gradually stabilizing in the solar rooftop sector as well. While on the other side, for C&I customers, I think the challenges are of multifold in terms of they are already paying high tariffs, but definitely they can bring down their operational cost substantially by installing solar rooftop on the available space. But at the same time, there the challenge is the DISCOMs are actually pulling them down because they are feeling that they are losing their huge amount of revenue. Yeah. So that's the dilemma which is happening under the solar rooftop sector. So just to summarize, I think the subsidy is like disguise in boon sort of situation. And at the moment, I think wherever, in whichever government is actually looking for such instrument has to also think of exit strategy at right time. Otherwise, it will distort the market, and that's not good actually. So thanks. I would stop here.
Thank you, Jigar. Yeah, very interesting, and thanks for providing those specific perspectives. I'll, being conscious of time, I'll tee up with starting with Michelle and then Anthony, and staying on the distributed solar side. Michelle, like, what role do you see distributed solar having in Latin America? Especially, we've seen distributed solar being a big market in Brazil, and thanks to net metering subsidies and virtual net metering subsidies, we've also seen distributed solar being obviously a critical function for Caribbean countries. And so in places where the grid infrastructure is not very reliable, and you have some limited availability of land for larger scale projects, how do you think is the best way to incentivize distributed solar, and what successes have you seen in Latin America that you think are applicable to other countries, in other developing countries such as Africa?
Thank you for the question. I guess one of the first thing I want just to mention is that many of the auctions, I don't have the number, when you talk about auctions in solar and wind, in the Brazil, for instance, they have no subsidies. They are not technologically specific auctions, and they already are competitive in some case. So it makes the technology really something cheaper, let's say, than other technologies, depending on the way you design it, of course. When you think about that, and there comes some challenge. Why? Because if you see the decentralized, the PV, the roof solar, it's exponentially increasing in some countries, such as Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. So it's an exponential increase. And there is the three mechanisms, the three countries have different ways to allow the injection of the electricity in the grid. But in the three cases, we did a small calculation to see the incentives that consumers have to put it in the grid, and it's substantial. And there, why this is this question? Because we need to be able to have a strategy that allow both things, both decentralized and centralized, and see what's the most efficient in somehow. So I guess we are there right now. What we see is that the centralized will be increasing, both will be increasing. That's what we'll be observing. And countries as Chile, for instance, they have the objective to decrease the CO2 emissions in the electricity sector really, really strongly in the next 10 years. So that's something that, and the solar specifically in Chile, it's something one of the best in the world in some regions. So that's one of the things that we'll be seeing, both centralized and decentralized. When you talk about subsidies, that's something really complicated, as you can imagine, in the region. And it's something that countries are avoiding as much as possible and using the resource they have. So that's a little bit the objective in the region. And I guess, I hope I answer your question.
Yes, yes, thank you. Anthony, you wanna chime in? You mentioned in your first comment that reliability in the power networks is an issue in Africa. So we'd love to hear what role distributed solar and distributed energy resources can have in sort of leapfrog the transition to renewables.
All right. So I'll speak on a project that I'm working on in Ghana, where they're trying to introduce net metering and with PV and storage. where you have now in areas where you have distributed solar along feeder lines, we use the battery now to stabilize the grid, at least the 100-kilometer grid to the next substation. So we're seeing that a lot, but also we're seeing a lot of battery storage playing a very big role in Africa. But of course, moving forward, one issue we've seen is that technical studies are still not available, but also from the country's perspective, in terms of the positive side of distributed solar is the fact that you can have virtual power stations, which have, and of course you have to create the backbone, the SCADA backbone, and they'll be able to stabilize the system across the respective country. So I think from a net metering perspective, it's only Ghana and South Africa that are quite a way ahead, but now we're seeing interests from Kenya to do the same, because every country has a target for universal access by 2030. Now, we can't just do long transmission lines for a cluster of maybe 50 people, but we can develop solar PV with battery storage at the respective feeder station that will be able to supply power to the respective community. So I think that's all I can say for that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, thanks for the examples. I think we are a little bit over time, but we've been pretty...
No problem, Paul. If you want to take some minutes more, there is time.
Are there, I know we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Are there any audience questions that came through, or shall we continue? Shall we continue ourselves?
Yes, you can continue encouraging, of course, audience if they want to write some question, but you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think, so I'll bring this back a little bit to Alessandro, and because you've been, it seems like you've been more involved in the execution rather than just a framework, establishing frameworks, given how the different European countries have established their own policies for renewable energy deployment. And I'd love to hear really what, in terms of actual projects and the financing process, what are still the highest obstacles in the development phases across the European projects and then the non-European projects as well that you're seeing? Are we talking, is grid constraints and interconnection delays the main barrier, or are there any other things that are delaying projects more than what you previously would have expected? I think you're on mute, Alessandro.
Apologies. I mean, even after a year of virtual conferences, I'm still making this mistake.
Always going to happen.
From time to time. No, thank you for the question. I will split it in two. So between EU and if you like, outside EU. I know outside EU is a bit broad, but I could speak about Africa actually, as we have a couple of recent solar operations we've done in Africa. So in the EU, I think there are two main challenges. I mean, one is really the scale of the ambition of the European Union in terms of, new installed capacity that will need to be deployed by countries in order to meet the targets. It's massive. Okay, it's massive. So we're talking about around 60 billion euro a year of investments in renewable energy. Which is almost twice. I mean, despite reduction in costs, it's almost twice as much the historical numbers. And what does that mean? Is that even if you have all the best market conditions, you need land, you need sites which are available, and this is a constraint in some countries. Okay, you may have the resource, but having availability of good sites and which are environmentally acceptable, environmentally and socially acceptable, is becoming increasingly a challenge. And I think the other challenge in the EU is once you have the site, is to get the permits as well. I mean, it takes time. If you participate into an auction, you need to win the auction and get the support under that auction. But then you need environmental permit, construction permit, grid connection. Again, this takes time, and we have little time if we want to meet our targets. And I think the third challenge is revenues. So we were speaking about this earlier, so I won't say much more. But it's how you secure your revenues in the absence of the old feed-in tariff. So it's either PPAs or CFDs in short. But you need CFDs, you need the auctions, and PPAs. There's a limited number of let's say credit-worthy counterparties who are also willing to commit to buying for long term, which you need for bankability. So I think this is in the EU. This is the main thing. I think if you speak about Africa, I think we heard somewhat from Anthony. I think that there's an immense resource available, and land is usually also available. So I think what you need in most of the countries in Africa is to have an appropriate regulatory and legal framework, especially for the private sector, to develop projects. And I would say, based on the experience of promoters coming to us, it is important to see the capacity of the promoter to develop the project in a timely and quality fashion. It's important that they give relevance to ESG aspects, so environmental and social, which for a solar, one might think that the impacts are not so important, but they can be. They can be. I think that the main thing is the land. So who is owning or who has rights over this land? So that's an important factor that needs to be looked at. And then maybe grid connection is also a very important point, and it's not just about physically connecting from the project to the grid. Yes, of course. Who is doing it? In many cases, it is not part of the project scope. Then if it is the grid company doing it, what is the timing of that grid connection? Who is liable in case the grid connection is delayed? Are appropriate ESG standards applied, to that grid connection as well? Because a high voltage line may have higher impacts than a solar PV farm, and that might not be part of the project. But still, it is, it's an associated facility to the project, and as EIB, we have responsibility that even that connection is following adequate international standards. So I've named a few that we've encountered, but I think Africa has an immense potential that we are happy, to support, and we are working actually quite closely with the African Development Bank. For example, we have this Desert to Power initiative where we're cooperating, and we're hoping to, to support solar projects in Africa more than we've done so far.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Great to hear this. Jigger, Michelle, I'll tie up with both of you. Jigger, I'll start with you. Same question. Main challenges in the whole development phase and getting projects to commence operation. What are developers saying, and what are the biggest challenges that you're currently facing?
Yeah, so thanks, Paul, and let me just confirm what Alessandra has already said. I think as development bank, we also look at all those parameters, including safeguard compliance, and I mean, I think it's over and above the law of the land. Of course, the law of the land in developing countries are supportive and are of also a nature where we believe that these are sufficient, but then some of the region, the implementation becomes challenge. So it's not easy for or seeking a compliance to the safeguard, be it environmental or a social safeguard, that those kind of matter. So sometime the projects get scrapped because of such non-compliances, not only from the development bank side as a financer, as a lender, but also from the government authorities as well. We have seen and we have encountered such cases where such things are happening. So it is very important to comply with the safeguard requirements while you are actually doing any development at the field of any kind of projects. Of course, renewable is also not not a exception in this case. So specifically what all Alessandro has already said, I would like to go more into a distributed kind of, because his perception, I can see the kind of challenges he has brought in are mostly well covered in terms of solar park, large solar project. But the challenge is slightly, become a multifold in a distributed solar projects, where you deal with many entities in terms of, getting the things going on. So I always compare it with a value chain kind of analogy, where if you see there are few elements to the value chain where the policy makers like a government agency, state government, and the central government agencies are actually one element of the chain. Then the second element is the developer, EPC contractor. I think they are also play a very crucial role in the value chain. Maybe the third link is the consumer, though they are the beneficiary of the project, but they enough awareness and knowledge and willingness is also important. If you really want to develop a distributed solar in a region, then that is very important. Otherwise the development cannot happen. I mean and the third, I mean the fourth element I would say in this entire value chain is financial intermediaries, or the financier, or the lenders, I would say. So banks, public sector banks or private sector banks who lends the project in a way, eventually you need a financier for the project. So at every level, I would say there are challenges and obstacles which in any given region everybody faces. Like a policy level challenges which involves framing up a conducive atmosphere in the sector, in the region, and also a policy should be enabling the market. Otherwise it will not encourage people to come forward and invest. At the same time, of course, the policy should be self-explanatory and simple enough to understand from the end consumer level, and it should be covering it should be safeguarding to the all stakeholder, I would say, in the sense, while all these value chain element in the value chain should be getting some benefit out of it. And in this entire chain, I would say the most important element, which are discoms. As you rightly mentioned, it is very important to get the net metering or gross metering done, or even we are now seeing a concept which is called net billing. So I think they are the enabler, and they have to come forward. They have to, I mean, the perception in the discoms are like they are feeling like they are considering the solar rooftop or a distributed solar as a threat to their business, which is in a way true also, but that's the rule where the government has to come up and play and give the equivalent benefit to the discoms. Otherwise, discoms are already in the deep trouble, and then by doing so, you are actually bringing, I mean, you are pushing them to the more troubleful area. So I think this entire chain has to work in a synergy in order to develop a kind of desired target or desired goal, which the governing body decides. So I think, so basically I just wanted to give a a good idea that how these elements play a role in their own, and then how they bring challenges also in order to stop the development. So that's the point I just wanted to share over here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Michelle, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to be really direct because of the sake of time, but I guess there is 4 points. One, I'd like to want to remember that some of the countries in the region, they have already put in place a bankable mechanism to increase renewables. And the question there is how to increase the renewables in the system. So the question of dispatching, of flexibility. So there is all the regulatory stuff that needs to be put in place to value flexibility that will help to increase. Example of this, Brazil have auctions of renewable since 2005. So all the process, it's really something that people do. The increase of the renewables in matrix depend much more on the capacity that will be to increase actually variable renewables in the dispatch match. So this, it's a regulatory thing in market design and how it will be dispatchable, how we'll be paying, who will be paying the flexibility. Another element to increase, and you have countries such as Uruguay and Costa Rica that are almost 100% renewables. So it's really, for increasing the renewables, we need to really think how to work with the flexibility and also how to electrify the system. And this process of electrification of the systems with the transportation, with green hydrogen, that's something that they're working on. It will be key to increase the participation of renewables. Of course, there is some countries that still have some challenges on the increase of the renewables in the matrix, and there can be learned lessons of these other countries that we have worked. When you talk about the second point, it's about access, energy access, and there, even if the region, it's already it's a place that we have almost the universal access, so we still have some gap, and most of the countries, we have some 2 or 3 exceptions, but most of the countries we are in the last mile. There are people in the Amazon forest, and there we have a place to go with solar, and the market design, the business model, and the regulation in some countries there are more challenging, and there is no a mechanism that fits for all. So that's something, I guess, that to keep in mind. And last but not least, when you talk about distributed energy, one of the key elements is the regulation of tariffs, the tariff design. And there it's something that we need, many, to not say most of the countries, need to be really careful work at, because in most of the case, the objective is not to give a subsidies, because many countries are already renewable, so need to be really careful to balance the matrix in a mechanism that you can allow and even potentialize distributed energy, because it generates jobs and it empowers consumers. That's something really important, but also to avoid any subsidy that's not necessary and can be damaging for the system and increase tariffs in the end. So the tariff structure needs to be really carefully considered.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Those were all great points. I know we have a minute left. I'll just put my analyst hat for the last minute, and if this conversation would have been a report, I guess one of the main conclusions that we can take for us and for the audience is that in order to achieve higher levels of private investment into renewables, be it a developed or developing nations, what we need is secure revenues, either through contracts, auctions, feed-in tariffs, you name it. Credit worthiness and credit enhancements, especially in developing nations, or even in developed nations where the limited amount of credit worthiness is an issue for lenders and other investors. We need to provide enough technical support and clear, defined policy, both in terms of the different auction mechanisms, the different compensations, as well as the different tariff structures, as Michelle just pointed out. And then we also have to analyze within this technical framework how we ensure that grids and power networks are able to cope with an increased share of renewables, either on a centralized basis with large scale farms, as well as on a distributed solar basis. And with these remarks, I'd like to thank everybody here in the panel. This was fantastic. A lot of diverse opinions and perspectives. I hope the audience took a lot home from this. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Giannis. Yes, thanks for having me as well.
Yes, thanks to all. Thank you, Chun. This was a great panel. And thank you, Paul, for moderating this great panel. Thank you, Chun. You can then take out this the image that anyway show all the profile of the speakers. Actually, today has been a very intense day. We really started with a great opening overview with great institutions like IRENA, IEA, Energy Watch Group, International Solar Alliance. We went through also what we need in terms of policy, in terms of what are the barriers, authorization process, anyway, what are the challenges? Anyway, for sure, we need simplification and in terms of legislation and regulation as well. And let's say we could not conclude better with the point of view from the financial institutions and of course your moderation, Paul, anyway, and of course your media, which is so much authoritative on finance, the point of view of what is needed anyway from the financial institution has been very, very important. I seen that of course Africa has been mentioned many times, and tomorrow we'll have a full day or a deep dive on Africa. What's the role of solar in increasing the access to power, and how to increase the clean energy in general and in a democratic way. I think it was a first very important first day of the Global Solar Council Virtual Forum. We give in this way the floor to a second day tomorrow, starting from 10 o'clock Central European Time. I know there is audience from all over the world for a deep dive on Africa. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to all the panelists here anyway, Michelle, Anthony, and of course Jigar, and thank you, Paul, for the great moderation. And so I hope you can also attend tomorrow, and this session is recorded and so will be available very soon in our website, and so see you tomorrow. We have concluded in a very best way this first session. Thank you, Alessandro. Sorry, I was jumping anyway, and thank you also the point of view of Europe and what Europe is doing also for the emerging markets. See you tomorrow, and have a good evening all day anyway. Enjoy the rest of the day to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. It's a pleasant experience. And thanks, Paul, for your navigation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.